The morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of Platinum Wings Aviation, a sanctuary of luxury, power, and exclusivity perched along the wealth-drenched coast of California. Everything about this place was designed to dazzle, to impress, and more importantly, to separate. From the exquisite crystal chandeliers suspended from the cathedral ceilings to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased a fleet of gleaming private jets on the tarmac, it was clear this wasn't just a showroom. This was a declaration. A declaration that said only the elite need enter. Standing in the center of this temple to opulence was Greg Weston, 35 years old and every inch the image of success. His Italian-cut suit hugged his frame with tailored precision. The silk tie knotted perfectly beneath his strong jaw, and his Rolex shimmered in the morning light like a badge of honor. For 3 consecutive years, Greg had been Platinum Wings' top salesman, and he wore the title like armor. Greg didn't need a handshake to size someone up. In his world, wealth had a scent: leather interiors, expensive colognes, handmade loafers that never touched public pavement. He could smell money from across the room, and when he didn't waste a second. So when the showroom's automated doors glided open with a whisper, and a middle-aged man stepped inside in faded jeans, scuffed work boots, and a weather-worn gray hoodie, Greg didn't need more than a blink to categorize him. Another daydreamer. Another nobody. Hair slightly unkempt, eyes soft but weary, like someone who had grown used to being overlooked. He carried himself with the apologetic air of a man who had learned to walk softly through rooms that weren't built for him. Greg approached, his smile practiced and polished, but hollow. "Can I help you, sir?" His tone was just polite enough to avoid being rude, but the subtext was loud and clear. "This place isn't for you." The man looked around the showroom with wide, almost childlike eyes. He wasn't casing the place for bargains. He was absorbing it, marveling at something sacred, like a kid stepping into a space shuttle for the first time. "I was hoping to take a look at some jets," he said quietly. "Maybe something mid-range, perhaps a Gulfstream G288. Greg nearly choked on his own amusement. A G280, starting at $15 million? This guy looked like he'd have to finance a keychain from the gift shop, let alone an aircraft. Still, company policy required that he qualify all prospects, no matter how hopeless they appeared. "Well," Greg began, eyeing the man with skeptical precision. "The G280 is quite the investment, sir. Have you owned any aircraft before? Are you familiar with the private aviation market?" The man shook his head, eyes still locked on a display model behind a velvet rope. There was a strange, silent reverence in his expression, not the kind driven by greed, but something deeper. Nostalgia? Longing? "No," the man said, his voice calm and unembarrassed. "This would be my first." Greg stiffened. There was something unsettling about the quiet certainty in the man's tone. He didn't sound like someone guessing his way through a fantasy. He sounded like someone who had made up his mind a long time ago. Still, Greg had been in this game too long. He'd learned to trust labels, not guts. In his experience, real wealth didn't show up in hoodies asking about aircraft specs. Real wealth wore Armani, drove Ferraris, and came in with pre-approval from finance. "There's a 2-year waitlist for new Gulfstreams," Greg said coolly, "and the deposit alone is—" "Money's not the issue," the man cut in gently. Calm, clear. His voice didn't rise, but it settled over the room like something absolute. "I'm more interested in performance metrics, range, long-term maintenance requirements." Greg hesitated. He didn't like how calm the guy was. He didn't like how he couldn't pin him down. One part of him, his ego, wanted to shut the conversation down, file this man away under Time Waster. But the part of him that had clawed his way to the top knew better. Something didn't add up. Still, his pride surged. "I understand," Greg said, his voice tightening with finality. "But with all due respect, the G200 isn't for people just browsing. We serve serious clients only." He reached for a brochure, the consolation prize, a glossy pamphlet designed to be a polite brush-off. What Greg didn't know was that in that very moment, he had just thrown away the biggest opportunity of his career. "You're welcome to take this home and think it over," he added, offering the brochure with a hollow smile, a gesture of exclusion disguised as kindness. Across the showroom, Jennifer Mills, a junior sales associate with less than 6 months on the job, watched the exchange with growing unease. She might have been new, but she wasn't blind. Greg's way of handling underqualified clients was the kind of thing people whispered about behind closed doors, and not kindly. The man in the hoodie took the brochure with a slow, knowing nod. It was clear he wasn't surprised by the dismissal. He had likely experienced 1,000 just like it. Still, there was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet curiosity. "I understand," he said softly. "Could I at least see the technical specifications? I'm particularly interested in the avionics systems." Greg glanced at his Rolex. He had a real appointment in less than an hour. A pre-qualified tech CEO, the kind of man he actually wanted to talk to. "Sir, I really don't think." "It's Skinova Aerospace, isn't it?" the man interjected, this time with a sharper edge to his voice. "I'm especially curious how their navigation tech integrates with your flight management systems." Greg froze. Skinova Aerospace was a specialized supplier. Unless someone was deep in the industry, they wouldn't know that name, let alone reference how their systems interfaced. Greg's brain scrambled for footing, but he was already too far gone. And for the first time that day, he realized he might have just underestimated the wrong man. The name Skinova wasn't something outsiders casually dropped. It wasn't like quoting Apple or Tesla. It was a niche industry name, known only to those who lived and breathed aviation systems, engineers, pilots, people who had earned their stripes. Greg felt a flicker of doubt, a single crack in his confidence. "But anyone can Google that these days," he reassured himself. "Yes," Greg said, his tone clipped and detached. "Skinova makes excellent components, but again, without proper financial qualification, I can't justify spending time going over detailed specs. This is a sales floor, not a museum." At a nearby workstation, a couple of other employees had started to take notice of the conversation. Marcus Webb, a veteran salesperson with a habit of punching down, chuckled from his desk. "Greg's caught himself another dreamer," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Guy probably watched a movie with private jets and thought he could play pretend." The man in the hoodie heard it. The marble showroom's acoustics didn't hide much. He didn't react, not outwardly. No outburst, no glare, just a subtle tightening of his jaw. But in his eyes, something shifted, like a wound being opened, not for the first time. "I see," he said calmly, with a voice that was quiet but carried weight. There was a finality to it. He turned to leave, but before he could make it to the doors, Jennifer Mills, barely 6 months into the job, took an instinctive step forward. "Sir, wait. I'd be happy to bring you some detailed brochures, or perhaps we could schedule a time when—" "Jennifer," Greg's voice sliced through the air like a razor, cold, controlling. "I believed the gentleman was just leaving." The man turned to Jennifer. His eyes held something warm, not pity, not defeat, something closer to gratitude. He shook his head gently. "That's kind of you," he said, "but it's all right." And with that, the automatic doors closed behind him. From behind the desks, someone snorted. Laughter followed. "Let's say, did you see those boots?" Marcus said, practically wheezing. "I've seen janitors who dress better than that." Greg straightened his tie, satisfied. just saved the company an hour of wasted time. In this business, you've got to know how to read people. Jennifer didn't say a word. She simply turned and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window. She saw the man walking across the lot, hands in the pockets of his faded hoodie, steps slow but not defeated. There was a quiet weight to the way he moved. It wasn't resignation, it was reflection. And something about his silhouette felt familiar. He disappeared behind a row of parked vehicles. But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that Greg had just made a serious mistake. Still, she was the new kid. Greg was the legend. Who would believe her? Outside, the man stopped beside a modest rental car. He looked back at the Platinum Wings showroom one last time. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message. But he didn't bother to check it. Some part of him whispered, "Some things never change." But he knew. Deep down, something big was about to. Malcolm Hines sat quietly in the rental car, staring at the gleaming glass building that now towered where Hangar 7 used to be. 25 years ago, this spot had looked nothing like it did now. There were no chandeliers, no velvet ropes, no $20 million 0-cent jets behind glass. Just the smell of jet fuel, motor oil, and broken dreams. He closed his eyes, and in an instant, it was as if time folded. He could feel his hands gripping the cold metal handle of a mop bucket, pushing it across the industrial concrete floors. 10 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning, cleaning the same corridors where millionaires strutted by day. Back then, he was 19, a college dropout. Calloused hands, grease-stained coveralls, a head full of impossible dreams that had no place in the world he cleaned. While corporate execs in suits boarded private jets and sealed million-dollar deals, Malcolm worked the shadows, invisible, unseen, just a cleaning guy, nodded at by the night guard and ignored by everyone else. Then, like a sudden punch to the gut, a memory surfaced. Right here, this exact spot, he had once stood, mop in hand, watching through the hangar window as a Gulfstream taxied across the runway. He had stopped, just for a second, and imagined himself not scrubbing the floors under those seats, but sitting in them. That dream had felt so far away, it was almost cruel to even imagine. And then came the voice. "Hey, janitor boy, those floors aren't going to clean themselves. Some of us have real work to do." He remembered the name, Richard Blackwood, a young executive who passed through frequently, the kind of guy who said his name extra loud so you'd never forget it. Malcolm had mumbled an apology and gone back to work, but the shame stayed with him for years. Blackwood was probably only a few years older, but wore $1,000 suits and talked aviation like he owned the sky. Malcolm? He wasn't allowed to touch the planes, much less dream about flying them. But the deepest cut wasn't the insult. It was the invisibility, the way Blackwood, and so many like him, had looked through him like he wasn't there, like someone with no value, no future, no dream worth acknowledging. Malcolm opened his eyes and started the engine. As he drove away from Platinum Wings, he passed the old employee parking lot, the same one where his beat-up Toyota Corolla had sat night after night. He remembered eating dinner from a vending machine because the airport cafe was out of reach. He remembered sitting on the hood of his car during breaks, sketching airplane designs on napkins with a ballpoint pen. Those napkin sketches? They were ridiculous, crude, and full of hope. And somehow, they became the blueprint for the rest of his life. Back then, he was still a janitor when one night he overheard a crisis. A jet had suffered a navigational failure. The maintenance crew was stumped. The part wouldn't arrive until morning. But Malcolm Mop nearby heard enough. He looked over once and instantly recognized the issue. A simple wiring fault, something any first-year electronics student could have diagnosed. But he was the janitor who would listen to him. Still, something inside him, half desperation, half courage, spoke up. "Excuse me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I think I might know what's wrong." The head technician stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Kid, you push a mop, we fix airplanes." But Captain Torres, the seasoned pilot, raised an eyebrow. "Let him take a look. We're not going anywhere tonight otherwise." Hands trembling, Malcolm traced the wiring harness and found the problem. A single loose connection. 10 minutes, $0, problem solved. Torres was impressed enough to recommend Malcolm for a job at a small aircraft parts supplier. It wasn't glamorous, just basic assembly work. But for Malcolm, it was a lifeline, his first step away from the mop bucket, his first step toward the sky. From there, his journey was built on 18-hour days and unshakable grit. Days assembling parts, nights studying electrical engineering at community college. Every step forward was fueled by that old memory, the cold floors of Hangar 7, the cruel laughter, the feeling of being looked through. 10 years later, Malcolm launched his own company, Skinova Aerospace, out of a rented garage with 2 employees and a business plan scribbled on the back of a greasy pizza box. They specialized in affordable, reliable navigation systems, the same kinds Malcolm had once repaired under fluorescent lights. Skinova grew slowly, but when their tech caught the attention of major aircraft manufacturers, the floodgates opened. Why? Because Malcolm had lived it. He knew how planes worked, from the wiring to the humiliation that came with being treated like you didn't belong near one. He had built a company not just from knowledge, but from memory, from pain, from a relentless desire to never let another dreamer be dismissed the way he was. And now, the man they'd once ignored in a hoodie stood on the verge of changing everything. Malcolm understood aircraft from the ground up, not through textbooks, but through nights spent scrubbing the cold floors beneath their landing gear. He had studied them in silence, with sore hands and tired eyes, absorbing lessons no Ivy League engineer could replicate. Because he didn't just study planes, he suffered next to them. Now, 25 years later, Skinova Aerospace employed over 3,000 people, held multiple patents, and had its name etched into the navigation systems of jets flying across the world. Malcolm's net worth had surpassed $2 billion, 0 cents. But in his memory, the taste of vending machine sandwiches and the sound of being called Janitor Boy still echoed. As he drove back to his hotel, Bluetooth picked up a call from his assistant. "Malcolm, the Aerotech Jets acquisition documents are ready. The board meeting is set for Friday." "Good," Malcolm replied smoothly. "And Rebecca, make sure Greg Weston gets a personal invitation. I want him seated in the front row." There was a pause. "Greg Weston, the salesman? Any specific reason?" A cold, thoughtful smile crossed Malcolm's lips. He remembered the sneer in Greg's voice, the dismissiveness in his tone, the way he had looked straight through him, as if he weren't even there, just like Richard Blackwood had done all those years ago. "Let's just say, he and I have unfinished business." He pulled into the hotel parking garage and caught his reflection in the rear-view mirror. The man in the hoodie was gone. In his place sat someone with resolve etched into every line of his face, a man who had been overlooked, dismissed, mocked, but had never given up. And yet, for Malcolm, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about change. About making sure no 19-year-old kid with a mop bucket ever felt like they were invisible again. 3 months earlier, in a sleek glass conference room 30 stories above downtown Seattle, Malcolm had been poring over the financial autopsy of a dying empire. Aerotech Jets. Sales were down 40% year over year. 3 major contracts had vanished in 6 months. The numbers told a brutal story. "Customer satisfaction ratings are at an all-time low," said Sarah Chin, CFO of Skinova, clicking through her presentation slides. The main complaints are consistent: arrogant sales reps, poor post-sale support, and, this one's frequent, customers being judged by their appearance. Malcolm clenched his jaw. He'd seen that culture before, lived it. It had tried to bury him. Sound was burying Aerotech. "There's one more thing," Sarah added, her voice dipping. "Their flagship showroom is located at Metropolitan Airport, specifically in what used to be Hangar 7. The room fell dead silent. Everyone there knew Malcolm's story, but his face remained composed, calm. "That's quite a coincidence," he said quietly. "What's the asking price?" $250 million, Sarah answered. "But with their position, we could drive it down. 180, maybe 160. Malcolm rose and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below him, the city pulsed with energy. Skinova had already surpassed everything he ever dreamed. But this wasn't just business. "This deal goes through," he said. "But we do it through Meridian Holdings." Meridian was a shell subsidiary Skynova used to maintain anonymity in sensitive acquisitions. When David Park, head of market research, asked why, Malcolm answered plainly, "Because I want to assess their culture personally before I change it." Weeks later, the deal closed quietly. $190 million 0 cents bought every piece of Aerotech, its assets, staff, contracts, and legacy. A confidentiality clause kept Malcolm's identity sealed for 90 days, allowing him to move like a ghost through the company. When Malcolm visited Platinum Wings, he wore ripped jeans and a faded hoodie by design. It wasn't a disguise, it was a test. And Greg Weston had failed, spectacularly. Now, sitting in a luxury suite above the city, Malcolm reviewed the security footage his team had quietly retrieved. Every dismissive glance, every sarcastic laugh, every cold rejection. A text pinged from Rebecca. "Aerotech board meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. Friday. Full leadership team will be present." Malcolm typed back, "Perfect. Have the security footage queued up for the presentation." He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of memory settle over him. 25 years ago, no one had looked at him. Now he owned the building. And still, this wasn't about vengeance. This was about transformation, about building a culture that valued potential over appearances, about making sure no one was mocked because of their shoes, or ignored because of their skin, or dismissed because they looked like they didn't belong. The only question left was, could people like Greg Weston change, or would they be left behind? Malcolm opened his laptop and typed the final message to legal. "Proceed with the announcement. It's time for Aerotech jets to meet their new owner." Outside the window, the evening light bathed the skyline in gold. Somewhere across town, Greg Weston was likely toasting another sale, confident he had protected the company from yet another unqualified visitor. He had no idea that an earthquake was coming. Word spread like wildfire. The elusive owners of Meridian Holdings were finally going to reveal themselves. Rumors swirled through the halls of Aerotech jets, industry veterans, private equity kings, aviation royalty. In his office, Greg Weston spent the morning rehearsing his pitch. His sales record was impeccable. Surely, he thought, the new management would see his value. "I heard they're here to expand," whispered Marcus Webb as employees trickled into the main conference room. "Might even be reassigning territories." Greg adjusted his platinum tie clip, a reward he had gifted himself after closing a recent high-dollar deal. "Gambly made a smart move buying us," Greg said, oozing confidence. "This company's headed to the top, especially with people like me leading the charge." At the back of the room, Jennifer Mills sat quietly. But her mind wasn't on the meeting. It was still stuck on the man in the hoodie. Something about him, his voice, his eyes, had haunted her all week. It was like he had been in that showroom before, but not as a visitor. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the double doors opened. Rebecca Chin, the executive assistant, entered first, followed by a group of suited professionals, their faces unreadable behind layers of corporate polish. And then, the final figure stepped through the door. Jennifer felt her breath catch in her throat. Malcolm Hines. No hoodie. No hesitation. Just a man in a finely tailored charcoal suit, commanding the room without saying a word. His eyes scanned the space with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he had built. Jennifer recognized him immediately. The man Greg had dismissed just 3 days earlier now radiated a presence that demanded respect. Greg, meanwhile, was too busy shaking hands to notice, until Malcolm walked to the front of the room, turned to face them, and said, "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Malcolm Hines, founder and CEO of Skanova Aerospace." He paused, letting the weight of the name drop. "And as of last week, I'm also your new owner." The room erupted into murmurs of shock. Everyone had heard of Skanova. Its reputation for integrity and innovation was legendary. But what caught Jennifer's eye was Greg's face. He had gone completely pale. His smile froze mid-expression. His body stiffened like a statue. Because the window shopper he'd brushed off like dirt on his loafers now owned everything. And Malcolm? He hadn't even started yet. "I want to be transparent with all of you about why I bought Aerotech," Malcolm began, standing calmly at the head of the conference room, his voice steady but unwavering. "This company's problem isn't its products, it's its culture. Customer satisfaction has hit an all-time low, and the number one reason is this: how the sales team treats potential clients." Across the room, Marcus Webb shifted nervously in his seat. Long-tenured employees exchanged uneasy glances. Malcolm nodded toward Rebecca. "To illustrate that point, I'd like to show you a video, recorded earlier this week." The lights dimmed, the massive screen flickered to life. There it was, crystal clear security footage from the Platinum Wings showroom. Malcolm, unmistakable in his faded hoodie and jeans, walking through the doors. The room went still. Then Greg appeared on screen, all polished smiles and smug indifference, his tone dripping with condescension as he dismissed Malcolm, judging him from head to toe. Every word was captured, crisp and undeniable. Then came Marcus's voice, sharp as a knife. "Did you see those shoes? I've seen janitors dressed better." Jennifer turned away, her stomach tightening. There she was, on the screen, stepping forward, trying to help, only to be cut off by Greg's cold interruption. The video ended. Silence swallowed the room. Greg sat frozen, his face drained of color. Others glanced uncomfortably at their own shoes, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Then Malcolm turned, eyes locked on Greg. "Mr. Weston," he said calmly, "do you recall that conversation?" Greg opened his mouth, then closed it again. Yes, sir. But I only—" "You have a process," Malcolm cut in, voice sharpening, "a process for qualifying customers, and you have a habit of making assumptions based on appearances." "You looked at me," Malcolm continued, stepping forward. "And because I wasn't wearing a $1,000 suit, because I didn't speak like a billionaire, you decided I couldn't possibly afford a $15 million 0-cents jet." A pause. You could hear hearts beating. "You were wrong on both counts." The silence deepened. Jennifer felt her chest tighten. Every word Malcolm spoke carried the weight of decades, not of money, but of memory. Greg fumbled, desperate. "Sir, if I'd known who you were—" "And that," Malcolm cut in again, his voice quiet but razor-sharp, "is exactly the problem. How you treat someone shouldn't depend on who they are or what they're wearing. Every person who walks into that showroom, even just to look, deserves respect and professionalism. He turned to face the entire room. I didn't succeed because I judged people by their clothes. I succeeded despite being judged. His voice dropped lower, heavier. 25 years ago, I worked in this building. I was the janitor. I mopped the floors at night. And I dreamed of flying the jets I had to clean under. But men like Mr. Weston, they made me feel invisible, like those dreams were ridiculous, like I didn't matter. A hush fell across the room. Jennifer blinked back tears. Malcolm was a billionaire, but the scars were still there, and everyone could hear them in his voice. But here's what Mr. Weston didn't realize, Malcolm said, his voice rising again. The man he dismissed as just a janitor founded the company that supplies over 60% of the avionics in the very aircraft this company sells. Integrated over the past 0 and 1 cents. This man, Malcolm said, stepping forward, just bought this entire company. Greg looked like he might vomit. His hands trembled. His skin was pale, waxy. With immediate effect, Malcolm declared, Mr. Weston will be reassigned to the customer service training program. For the next 6 months, he'll learn how to treat people with dignity and respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they appear to have. It landed like a blow to the stomach. Greg couldn't speak. This was a public reckoning, and it was well-deserved. Malcolm continued, his voice calm but unwavering. Ms. Jennifer Mills, he said, turning to her now, will be promoted to senior sales advisor, effective immediately. Jennifer's jaw dropped. She hadn't expected this, not even remotely. She demonstrated the kind of empathy and service-minded spirit that I want to see define this company. When others laughed, she offered help. That is the culture we're going to build here. The meeting ended. People left the room in stunned silence. Greg stayed in his seat, staring at the now black screen in front of him. His pride had cost him everything. His status, his reputation, and maybe even his career. 2 weeks later, Aerotech Jets was almost unrecognizable. Jennifer stood in her new office, corner windows, personal assistant, and most importantly, the authority to shape the customer service culture around Malcolm's vision. Rule number 1, she said during Monday's team meeting, is that everyone who walks through our doors gets treated the same. Doesn't matter what car they drive, what watch they wear, or what kind of shoes they have on. The room was quiet, focused. Everyone had heard about the meeting, about the video, about the man in the hoodie who turned out to own the skies. Many of the arrogant old guard had already jumped ship or been politely ushered out. Surprisingly, some were being courted by competitors who clearly hadn't seen the video. But those who remained, they were the ones who genuinely wanted to be better. We'll ask the right questions, Jennifer continued, handing out training materials. Not, what do you do for a living, but, what kind of mission are you flying for? What's your preferred range and flight time? What matters most in how your aircraft operate? Marcus Webb, who had narrowly avoided disciplinary action, hesitantly raised his hand. What if? They're just browsing. We still gotta protect our time, right? Jennifer smiled gently, remembering Malcolm's words. Even someone just browsing today might be a client tomorrow, and more importantly, they'll remember how they were treated. Every interaction builds our reputation or breaks it. Meanwhile, in a former boardroom turned training center, Greg Weston, once the company's golden boy, was learning humility the hard way. His instructor, Maria Santos, a former director of customer experience, had made a career out of reforming fallen executives. Mr. Weston, she said with a calm but firm tone, you're still thinking of customers as obstacles. People to manage, not people to serve. Greg squirmed in his chair. The last 2 weeks had been the most humiliating of his entire career. Tell me, that man who asked about the Gulf Stream, what did he really want? Greg swallowed hard. He wanted to learn about the aircraft. Exactly, Maria said. He was seriously interested in range, avionics, and performance. Do you remember anything specific he asked about? Ski Nova Aerospace, Greg muttered, almost too quiet to hear. He mentioned the navigation systems. I get it now. Maria nodded. He didn't ask randomly. He wasn't guessing. He founded that company. But even if he hadn't, how should you have responded? Greg looked down. I should have answered his questions, treated him with respect. Correct, Maria said, dropping a thick folder on the desk in front of him. And here's something interesting. Customer satisfaction has gone up 23% in just the last 2 weeks. Greg looked up, surprised. Change was in the air. And as Malcolm's vision began to take hold, it became clear that this wasn't a revenge story. It was a story about accountability, about transformation, about choosing empathy over ego. And the best part? It had only just begun. Well, Maria asked, smiling gently as she looked at Greg. Because when a salesperson stops judging and starts truly listening, customers can feel it instantly. The numbers didn't lie. Within just 14 days, Aerotech received 7 inquiries from new high-value leads. 3 of them had already entered serious negotiations, all of them mentioning that they'd heard the company was changing. And they were right. Malcolm Hines, the same man who had once walked through their showroom in a worn-out hoodie, now visited regularly, not to supervise but to mentor, to inspire. I still remember the first time I walked into a Cessna dealership. Malcolm shared over lunch with a group of new hires. I was 22, wearing the best clothes I had, which still weren't much. The salesperson glanced at me once, handed me a brochure for flight school, and never asked if I was planning to buy. What did you do? Asked Tommy Rodriguez, the newest team member. I thanked him and walked out, Malcolm said with a soft chuckle. 5 years later, I had the money. I bought a jet from another dealer. The first guy lost a $50,000, 0 cents commission, because he made a bad assumption. Day by day, the shift in Aerotech's culture became visible. The showroom was quieter now, not with disinterest, but with deeper conversations. Sales reps asked better questions, took more time. The break room, once filled with grumbling and gossip, was now alive with discussions about aviation tech and client success stories. But the biggest change was Malcolm himself. For the first time in 25 years, he walked through the building that had once made him feel invisible and saw pieces of his younger self in the bright-eyed employees who no longer had to fear being overlooked. Jennifer approached, a leather portfolio in hand. Her confidence was unmistakable. Quarterly results just came in, she said. Sales are up 38%. Customer retention is up 57%. Malcolm smiled, but his gaze drifted beyond the office windows, to the very tarmac where he once pushed a mop. They're good numbers, Jennifer, he said, but the real victory happened yesterday. She raised an eyebrow. As a young mechanic from the maintenance bay wandered into the showroom during his lunch break, Malcolm explained, hands still covered in oil, work uniform and all, and Tommy Rodriguez spent 20 minutes walking him through the G200 like he was a... Jennifer's eyes softened. He probably can't afford a jet today, Malcolm continued, but someday he might, and when that day comes, he'll remember how he was treated. That's the culture we're building. Jennifer understood. Aerotech's rebirth wasn't just about numbers. It was about values. It was about making sure that no young janitor with a dream ever felt invisible again. 6 months later, on the runway of Metropolitan Airport, Malcolm Hines placed a hand on the fuselage of a Gulfstream G280. The very aircraft Greg Weston once said wasn't for people who just wanted to look. Now it bore the Skynova logo and Malcolm's personal tail number. Bittersweet and powerful. Jennifer joined him, leather briefcase in hand, her smile radiating quiet pride. In just 6 months, she'd become one of the top sales consultants in the Western United States, not through charm or shortcuts, but by leading with empathy and respect. "Can you believe it?" she said, nodding to the aircraft. "Same jet you were once told you couldn't see?" "I believe it," Malcolm said with a laugh. "A lot can change in half a year." Jennifer chuckled. "Greg closed a deal yesterday." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Tech entrepreneur from Portland, flip-flops and a t-shirt. Old Greg would have sent him packing. Malcolm was surprised. "Is he doing okay?" Jennifer nodded. "Shockingly, yes. He's no employee of the month. But he listens. He understands now what it means to serve people with dignity." From inside the showroom, Malcolm spotted Greg speaking with a young couple. His tone was warm, his posture open. "A new man." "And last month," Jennifer continued, "a woman came in wearing a maintenance uniform. Greg spent 2 hours with her. No judgment. She bought a citation on the spot." Malcolm smiled. The story had come full circle. "And the company?" he asked. "Record-breaking revenue. Highest customer satisfaction in our history. Referral rates up 200%. Next year's inventory already sold out." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Turns out, treating people right is very good for business." A small crowd had gathered near the runway. After all, it's not every day a billionaire pilot flies his own jet, especially one who was once denied entry to that very showroom. From a distance, Malcolm spotted Carlos Mendez, the night security guard from decades ago, the only one who ever noticed him sketching jet engines on napkins during graveyard shifts. Malcolm approached him, extending a hand. "Carlos, right? You may not remember me, but—" "I remember you," Carlos said, smiling. "You were the kid with the mop and the eyes that saw something no one else did." Malcolm gripped his hand tightly. "Why didn't you say anything back then?" Carlos shrugged. "Wasn't my place, but I watched. I saw you pay attention, take notes, draw. When I heard you bought the company, I just shook my head." "The kid with the mop," he said quietly, "now owns the entire building." Malcolm's eyes shimmered. "And that kid learned something. Dreams don't expire." He turned and walked toward his jet. His phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "Aviation Weekly wants you on the cover, they want to call it. The Janitor's Revenge." Malcolm chuckled. He typed back, "Tell them this isn't about revenge. This is about proving that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they come from or what they wear. Idle it. The power of a second chance." He slid into the cockpit, the leather seat molded to him perfectly, but the true comfort came not from the chair, but from the journey it took to get there. As the jet rumbled to life, readying for takeoff, Malcolm glanced once more at the building below, now a beacon of hope, where every customer was welcomed, every employee was valued, and every dream was taken seriously. The jet rolled down the runway. The same concrete he once scrubbed on hands and knees was now the runway for his flight. In the showroom, Greg looked up, spotting the jet as it ascended. Their eyes met through the glass. This time, Greg nodded, not in defeat, but in understanding. Because now he knew. Humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of true success. The aircraft lifted gently into the golden evening sky, cutting through the clouds that once seemed like barriers, now just beautiful scenery. Somewhere down below, maybe there was another kid pushing a mop, sketching wings on napkins, daring to dream. And thanks to what happened at Aerotech, no one would laugh at that dream again. Malcolm engaged autopilot. The Skinova nav system hummed to life, guiding him to his next destination. And as the sky burned orange around him, Malcolm Hines smiled. This was the real definition of success. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we honor forgotten dreams, underestimated people, and the most powerful rebirth of all, kindness.